Good morning, dear students. Today we are going to start another topic, and that is called ethnicity. The term, what do you mean by the term ethnicity, and what are the different aspects of that? Everything we'll learn in this particular class. We have slides coming along. Do please listen carefully to the next session. Okay. Today we begin with ethnicity and how this ethnicity becomes part of marginalization. What do you mean by the term ethnicity, or what exactly is the meaning of the term ethnic? Ethnic or ethnicity is a term derived from Greek ethnikos, which refers to a people or nation. In a sense, this indicates a group of people or even a people belonging to a nation. It also means a group possessing some degree of coherence and people who are aware of having common origins and interests. Again, another term definition is a self-conscious collection of people united or closely related by shared experience. All these description fits the term ethnic or ethnicity. This is because this is described by or defined by the Encyclopedia of Race and Ethnicity. Let's see how these ethnic groups have become marginalized. You find in history several invasions. The Germanic invasion of England, which resulted in the pushing back of the natives of England. The Aryan invasion of India, which resulted again in the pushing of the natives of our country, earlier inhabitants, to one side, and Aryans dominated. So you find these existing natives being marginalized. Means the invaders came over and took over the country, and those who were existing were pushed to the margins, or they were forced to take a stand away from the center, and they were pushed to one side. If you take the colonial period, colonization also resulted in the same effect, because when the colonies were established, the aboriginals or the natives of that particular country was pushed to one side, and they were not heard of much for a long time. The term aboriginals, it means original people, people who belong to that particular land from time immemorial, and there was not any invasion, and so they belonged to that particular country or to that particular land. They left their homelands or withdrew to the interior landscape because the colonization pushed them with their guns and with their power, and they had no option except to withdraw to the interior landscape to escape the fight with the colonies or the colonizers, and as a result of which these aboriginals or the original people left their homelands, and they had to leave that homeland reluctantly and move back to the interior landscape. The examples you find in Australia, where the Aboriginals were pushed to one side. You have the Maori tribe and the other Aboriginals of Australia. And because of colonization, they were pushed to the one side, and the colonizers dominated the land. The same thing happened to Canada and also United States, where you have Native Americans, as they were called, and American Indians, Indians they were called, and they were pushed to one side. They were a fighting group, but even then, before the guns of the white man, they had nothing else to do except to move back and move their belongings and their tribe to far, far interior. So this resulted in marginalizing their group. Then, how do you feel or how do you experience marginality or the experienced marginality? In what way these people experienced marginality? The loss of their language, religion, and culture. That is the first instance. The white man came with his language and his religion and his culture, and whatever that the Aboriginals did were not up to them, and they were regarded as merely as savages. And so their language was translated to the Englishman, and the Englishman's language was acquired by the ethnic group. And what about the religion? The religion, usually they worshipped the nature or even the deities that they had. But again, the white man's religion dominated and they converted them to the white man's religion. So, in a way, whatever that was existing in their own land was almost diminishing and it was pushed to one side. They can't even speak of their religion, they can't even speak the language because all of them, or even their children, also had started speaking the language of the white man. And again, the culture. What about the culture? Usually they had their own way of dressing, and now you find that the white man has got a totally different type of dressing. And this type of dressing was also adopted by the tribal people and the aboriginals, and naturally, even their way of dressing and even their culture, like the festivals or their celebrations, everything diminished into almost a namesake or even almost to nothing. This is because they felt that they had to accede to or give way to the colonizers, and so they did that, and so in a way they were marginalized. This colonization destroyed collective myths, orators or literatures, and other indigenous practices. When you are a community or when you belong to a community, there is the collective myths connected to that particular tribe or to that community. Again, instead of most of them were not educated in the proper sense or in the modern sense, but they had a lot of orators or oral literature like stories which were passed on from one generation to another generation, and even the history of their tribe being spoken by people and even handed over to the one generation and to the other generation through words, not the written words but spoken words, and this we call as orature. So the collective myths, the orature, and literatures means whatever that was existing in their culture as literature or what was written, everything was lost to them or it was destroyed by the power of the colonizers, since they gave scant importance to the protecting of the orature or the collective myth or literature of or the other indigenous practices of the tribe. They never cared for that because the people, the colonizers, were intent only on amassing a lot of wealth from the country and also making these people either slaves or servants or making use of them. The colonizers did not give much importance to the culture of this particular group, nor did they ever encourage them to continue their practices because they felt that these people are mere savages, not civilized people, and they considered theirs as the only civilized group or civilized society. So all these places or the indigenous group or the aboriginals of that group of that particular country who were pushed to the margins or pushed to the interior landscape, they lost all their culture, and in a way some of them retained that culture, but most of them gave up that. and instead they imbibed the culture of the colonizers. So the destruction of the collective myths, orators, literature, now there is no one to tell the stories of the ancient days. And if there is anyone, they learned the language of the colonizers. So in learning that language, they lost their original language. And at the same time, whatever that had been handed over to them by their ancestors. And the modern generation or the younger generation, maybe they were not that interested in listening to these old stories from their elders. So, in a way, this destruction of the collective myths or literature and other indigenous practices of the group forced them to marginality. What about ethnic studies? What do you mean by this ethnic studies, or what all things are included under this title ethnic studies? Actually, ethnic studies refers to the study of the people who were uh, forced from their country to another country, and they were treated as slaves, and they had to abandon their country, and once they are in a different country they can't continue with their practices of their tribe, nor can they continue with the literature or the culture of their own tribe. And what sometimes they retained a little bit of their culture, but most often these were lost in transition. So, ethnic studies involves a collection from these people and the telling of the culture by the people themselves rather than the colonizers. Like for example, if there is an invasion, naturally you find a lot of people. That is, India was colonized by the British, or even the French and the Portuguese. All these people came over to India and they have written about India. It is their view that they have portrayed through their writing. Whatever that an Indian has to tell about his own country, his own culture, was not recorded. So, ethnic studies refers to the language or even the literature of from the margins or the people who belong to this particular group, and whatever that they have to tell us about their life, their culture, their views, etc. All these refers to the ethnic studies. And again, it refers to forcible trafficking of people from one country to the other, like the African slaves to America and Europe, and how these African slaves lost their culture when they were brought to America and Europe, and they had nothing retained from their earlier life, nor did they have enough time to pass it on orally to their younger generation because they were treated as slaves and they had a lot of work to do and not much time to collect memories and pass it on to the next generation. But even then, some of them retained that thought about their original land, and those who remembered that started writing it on their own, and that in turn forms ethnic studies. So you find that these people may be materially deprived and culturally denuded, politically neutered, or quite often all of these. So these aboriginals who were brought in to the mainland by the colonizers, they were deprived of almost everything, all their material possessions, because most of them did not have much material possession except the land that they lived in and the life that they lived in, and it is not their custom to amass a lot of wealth, and culturally denuded in the sense that they were not given a chance to develop their culture or to have practices which were part of their culture. So they were deprived of their culture in the land of the colonizer. Politically, they were neutered, means they have no voice at all, in the sense that they were not given a chance to speak for themselves or to have an attitude or an opinion about their own self. since they were always slaves. And so, quite often, they were always all these, that is, materially deprived, culturally denuded, and politically neutered. So, all in all, you find them an utterly marginalized group who just do not have the courage or the strength to voice their opinions or even to voice anything that is of their own. Even their voice was taken away from them. It is in that condition that they started living in the land of the colonizers. And from there on, they started developing, but even then, they were not given the status of a human being, only that of a slave, most often. And so, in a way, their life was that of more of marginalized groups who were not considered, who were of no concern to the mainstream except as a workforce. And it is in that sense they were regarded for a long, long time. Ethnic literature started developing much, much, much later. It started as part of post colonial studies. When the colonizers started moving away from these colonies, the country started developing, and also the natives started having a voice of their own, and the country started some of the countries were becoming independent, and voluntarily some colonizers gave up their position there and gave the country back to the natives of that place, as a result of which you will find a lot of writings coming up from these people. They now have the gift of the colonizers, sometimes in the form of the language. For example, in India, the British colonizers had really given us the gift of English, and almost all of us can either read or write English, and that was considered to be a boon because you can express yourself in the language and make it known to the whole world. And everywhere in the world, at least some people can really read and write English. So that is just one example. So the ethnic literature became part of post colonial studies in the 20th century, and an attempt was made to unearth the culture of the muted other. Why is it put in single inverted commas, muted other? The reason is that these people who were pushed to the margin, they were not given any voice. People wrote about them, but it is not from their standpoint. It is from their own, from the writer's own standpoint. It will never be the voice of the people because you are just observing them and only seeing them. You are not talking to them nor understanding them, and nor can you express whatever that they are feeling. So, in a way, it becomes a totally different way of writing, and this is why it is said that the marginalized remained muted. And so, this marginalized group was called for a long time the muted other. And it is their voice which came as ethnic literature in the 20th century, and as a result of which there was an attempt to unearth the culture that was almost taken away from them, and also to understand the myth or even the oral literature that existed among them, or even the literature that was the part of their life, and as a result of which there was much progress coming up, and you now have ethnic literature as part of post-colonial studies taking up precedence, and this in a way help us to understand more about the aboriginals and also those people who are pushed to the margin. And we have in India Dalit literature, and you have people writing about the Dalit, but you don't have anything written by these people themselves. And so, for the first time, you have Dalit writing coming up, and people who belong to Dalit group, they have started expressing themselves, which is totally different from the others writing about them. So, in a way, ethnic literature has improved, and it is doing a great lot to the understanding of the marginalized. The Native American Renaissance started in 1960 and progressed from 1970 on. And to read more about it, you can read your textbook and page number 106, the second paragraph, and even the paragraph that comes first and second paragraph. So, all these will help you to understand the Native American Renaissance in the sense that the coming up of the natives of America to the forefront so that they are protecting. They are not trying to stand with the white men, but they are trying to have a culture of their own, the culture that had been lost to them for a long time, and bringing a reason for them to be different from the white man and be a group of natives as themselves as it is, and also to show the world what their culture. You have ethnic literature or orators of the past like storytelling, trickster humor, sacredness of place, and mythic time. You find here an emblem of the importance of education in Indian country. This is from America and Wyoming Native American education, where you find these people or the Americans, the natives of America. They are the Indians, Red Indians, and the Indian tribe. They were taught in a different manner, much more suited to their life and their culture, not like the usual or the white man's classroom and everything, but in a totally different manner. Syllabus was devised, and it is that which includes a lot of native work and also their orature, like storytelling, trickster humor. All these were part of the native culture. Sacredness of place means certain places are sacred to the Indian, and they have no explanation. Sometimes they have no explanation. Sometimes they really do have some explanation for that. A protection of the place comes to the native Indian, while for a different person, it is not sacred at all. And also of the mythic time and how these people regarded time. Everything comes under ethnic literature or orators of the past. Orature means oral telling of the past, and oral telling can be that of the storytelling, and the humor of the trickster. Trickster in the means somebody who plays pranks and someone who actually has the role of a trickster, but at the same time he is an integral part of that particular tribe, and whatever that he has to tell, dancing and telling the story, everything was enjoyed by the people at that time. But now, because of the civilization intruding or even invading them, they had to move back and keep their uncivilized or the so-called uncivilized life to themselves. And now the world is coming to a stage to understand that their so-called savage nature or uncivilized state is worth studying about, and it is worth understanding. And that includes their mythology or the mythic stories and about the mythic time. Everything is really important now, and you now find a lot of research going on, and you find in America universities established for the native Indians, and it is one from their group who will be appointed there. And I think I have once told you about the condition of the teachers there. They have the storyteller, that is it is maybe that is like physics, chemistry, or even you have commerce or English department, where you have a teacher taking English and other teacher taking Malayalam or Hindi. You have here a department where you have the storyteller. The storyteller, in the sense that her one duty is to narrate all that had happened, all that had been handed over to her by the ancient through orature, and translate it to the modern generation, and in a way continue reviving the culture that had been once lost to them. So you find them teaching their children or teaching their students in their own way, trying to make them understand and be proud of the inheritance that had been theirs once upon a time. And so, ethnic literature and orators of the past really have a place now in the countries, and especially in all over the developed countries, they have that kind of a culture. And with the globalization coming over, connecting all the countries, there was a fear that people will lose their culture and there will be a kind of a uniformity coming over to the world. It is true to a great extent. But ethnicity revives the culture that is your own and gives importance to whatever that is good in that particular group. And it is helping us to uphold that. Even in our Kerala, we have our own culture and we are so very proud of that culture, something that is unique to Kerala. Certain art forms, you have a certain type of storytelling, and you have dance forms, everything is there, and even cultural wise, and even you have sacred places and which are protected because you can't go over there because it is a Sarpakavu and naturally it is a protected place. No one will ever dare to go for fear. But naturally, it is a protected place, and at the same time, it is a kind of an environmental protection by the natives themselves, or it was a way of protecting the forest or the trees around that. So, in a way, each tribe or each group native of that particular country or particular land has got their way of keeping up the nature or protecting nature, and at the same time having a culture of their own. And it is that culture which is being revived, and nobody is going to trample over it. Steps are being taken to protect it. This is why ethnic literature is important to us. And speaking of orality, you find in the writings of Louis Airbridge and also Scott Momaday and Leslie Marmon Silico, uh, the oral literature was taken and they were talking about that because there is much lost because it was not written down. But they are now trying to give an impetus to the oral literature and the orality that gives and much importance to the people, and it is that which you find much encouraging now because all is not lost, everything is now totally visible or could be read about because even if the person dies and there is no one to tell the stories or anything, you find these literature writing about orality and keeping up the tradition. Silko's book Ceremony is about cultural rootedness and as a political stance. This incorporates cosmology, narratology, ritualism, and mythology of the Laguna Pueblo. Laguna Pueblo is the tribe. You find pictures of that tribe here, how they are dressed, and they are from the reservation, understand? And reservation is a place where you find these native tribes were protected by the government and they are given a chance to revive their culture, their craft and art, everything. And people can also have contact, they can have education like the other civilians of the country, and you find this kind of a incorporation which is quite good for or benefit for both the natives and also the mainstream people. So these natives were brought to the mainstream and they had incorporated the cosmology, narratology, and ritualism and mythology of these tribes in and it is written in a book called Ceremony, and this is about cultural rootedness. And so this cultural rootedness is a stance taken by the marginalized, and they are now giving more importance to the culture that had once been theirs. So there is a lot of help from the world as it is because world now realizes that trampling over the culture of other country is not just the done thing, and you have to protect the group as such. And if you trample over the culture of one country, you will be totally destroying something really precious. Very slowly, the world is coming to learn that. And so, as a step to do something to improve the condition, or to change the harm that was done by the trampling, they are now reviving the culture of these tribes who were not protected at that time, but now who are now protected, and all that is theirs is taken into consideration, and they are given a place in society, and they are brought to the mainstream in one way or the other. Then you find these people writing autobiographies and explain the tribal identity to the mainstream, how they feel to be a part of the tribe and at the same time part of this civilized society. Mohammed's book, The Way to Rainy Mountain, published in 1969, explains how you are part of a tribal group, but at the same time, all your fellow human beings are the white men, and totally different culture they do have. And even in speaking, and even in doing things also, they are different. But at the same time, all these people can come and exist in the world as one group. And at the same time, you can retain your cultural inheritance in your own way and not adopt the modern ways as such. People really do cherish their inheritance in one way or the other. Like, for example, if you are a Keralite living in a far off country, you feel like dressing like them, but at the same time, you really want to retain your Kerala culture. And what about the food that you take in? And all your fellow beings there are having a certain type of food, but you in your house actually have the Kerala type of food. And in a way, you are having a culture of their own, of your own, by keeping apart from the other group and retaining this. And sometimes you can invite your friends over and let the others see what it is to be a Keralite. So in a way, this is retaining our own individuality. And these autobiographies explain how the tribal identity is different, and how it is for a tribal person to remain in the mainstream, but at the same time keep up his own his culture all to himself. So Mohammedi's book, The Way to Rainy Mountain, is a perfect example for that. Then cultural loss of these people came about due to Europeanization or Americanization, Europeanization and Americanization, because the European countries and America had really colonized the almost all the countries, and they had traveled or undertaken voyages to different countries and had colonized these people, pushed most of them to one side, and a cultural loss was felt by these people. And mainly the historian says that this is the because of the result of Europeanization and Americanization, not just because of the colonization alone, but somehow or other colonization has got a very important role to play. But again, you feel that when you get a job and you are in America, naturally you imbibe that culture and you forget your native culture. So this kind of Americanization and Europeanization had even crossed the borders and has come over to India also. And even now, you find that we are progressing, or we are more becoming more American and European than being an Indian or a Keralite. Then again, it is said that colonization becomes the narrative trope of the poems of Native American poets. So you find a tribal person, or maybe the second generation tribal person, the father is already employed, not in the tribe but in the mainstream. But at the same time, he remembers his past as a part of a tribe, and he can't just forget that. He tries to be a very stalwart citizen of the society, modern society, and then his daughter feels his daughter is second generation, and she feels that she is an American and not exactly a tribal person. Maybe her friends regard her as a tribal person, but she herself feels that she is an American, and she has no idea about what her father feels, or what her father, or the dilemma of the father as a tribal person and as part of the citizen of the society. So all these becomes an idea for expressing one's own self. And in the poems of Dan Glancy and Mary Tolmonden and so many other writers, they express this. And Dan Glancy's poem is there, and you find her expressing her feelings for her father, who belonged to a tribe and who is now a worker in a warehouse, and he drives a car, but he finds everything in connection with the buffalo, because to him buffalo was the sacred animal. To him, his tribe is known by that, and he really enjoyed being or hunting buffalo. And now it is just not possible. You can go to a shop and buy buffalo meat. You need not hunt it down like you used to do in the early days, but now everything is changed. But still, the glory of being a part of a tribe, part of doing something for your family or for your tribe, still is there in the mind of the father, as Diane Glancy expresses in her poem. So, all these poems, or the call, even part, the idea of colonization becomes a narrative trope of the poems of these Native American poets, and they explain in detail, or these poems reveal how their life is has been and how their life is now, and it is that difference that they express through their poems. So you find here the discourse about ethnicity and follows the marginalized groups of America, Canada, and Australia. You find other groups also, the Asian, Jewish, and African immigrants, and it is their identity that they're trying to protect. Their literatures are different from the First Nation people, and they include an assertion and celebration of their cultures. So you find the much celebrated Africanism in the works of Mary Baraka as a perfect example. Again, you find the minoritization as a political position, and the identity politics, the kind of identity politics at a time when there is a need for identities to be established. And so, from all these, the ethnic studies, ethnic literature, there emerge voices of dissent, because they don't want to be marginalized. They really want to be the mainstream, keeping intact their culture, their language, and everything that is theirs. It is that which they try to retain, and this is why there is a reason for their dissent, their total preoccupation with their own culture, and they are not agreeing with the norms of the civilized group. So, in a way, you can see that ethnic studies or ethnicity is an integral part of a human being, whether you are part of this country or that, or whether you're part of one tribe and living in a different country under a different kind of culture, you can still retain that ethnic that culture of yours, and you can also feel and also imbibe the culture of the other groups. So in a way, ethnicity, which is again part of marginalization, is now coming to the forefront and is now going to join the mainstream. And I hope you will go through the textbook as such, and read the section called ethnicity in detail, and go through the slides also. If you have any doubts, do please call me or refer to me in the question answer session. Thank you.